Welcome and thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar dealing with difficult patients. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians and sovereign people of the land on which we work. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal colleagues joining us today. My name is Majida Taleb and I'm Practice Support and Development Officer at Central Eastern Sydney PHN. I would like to welcome Evelina, also Practice Support and Development Officer at Central Eastern Sydney PHN, and then Annabel Herron, our guest speaker for tonight, who is a registered nurse and a risk advisor from Avant. I would now like to introduce our guest speaker, Annabel Herron. Annabel has been a risk advisor at Avant's Brisbane office for over 10 years. She assists doctors and practices by providing risk assessment, risk education, risk management, and prevention strategies. Annabel has worked in the health industry for over 35 years. Her experience includes general nursing, nurse education, and operating theatre nursing in both public and private adult and paediatric facilities. Welcome, Annabel.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Majida. I'm just sharing my screen. So tonight, we're going to talk about insights and strategies into managing difficult patient situations. And again, thank you for having me to speak on this really important topic. Advanced Risk Advisory is a service that's provided to you as part of your membership with Avant, whether that's through your practice policy or your individual practitioner indemnity policy. Now, the Risk Advisory service, we're mostly all registered health practitioners with the medical board. We have doctors, nurses, even a physio in our team. And what we do is we provide services to your practices and recommendations on how you can reduce your medico-legal risk. So we might get requests to go out proactively and look at your practice, your systems and processes, and we can, as I said, make recommendations on reducing your risk. If you are an individual practitioner and you're going through a complaints process, so say a patient has made a complaint about you in this space, you've had a difficult patient and they've reported you to APRA and said that you were rude and your communication was awful, your solicitor that's managing your case might employ me to help you do some education on communication and write a reflection on what you've learned from that education. And we put that in with your submission to the medical board to show that you've got a bit of insight, you're refreshing your knowledge in that space. And these are the changes that you're going to put into place so that it doesn't happen again. We might write advice to you. You might ring the medico-legal advisory service and ask for some advice about your privacy policy or, in fact, managing difficult patients. So we might come out and do a presentation at your practice if you've got a policy. So we are here to help you. I can't stress that enough. So please, if you ever do need some assistance, get in touch via our medico-legal advisory service. So tonight, I'm going to do a talk with a bit of general advice about managing difficult patients and interactions with patients, patient complaint management. I'm going to talk a little bit about ending the doctor-patient relationship because sometimes it does come to that. And I am also going to discuss a bit because I often get asked about what to do about your online reviews that often pop up in places like Google or RateMDs and how you should manage those and keep yourself out of trouble. So let's talk a bit about general advice for difficult patient situations. So 15% of clinical interactions with patients have been described by doctors as being difficult. And that's from a BMJ article from 2013. So you can see there that at Avant, 1 in 8 claims involved perceived disrespect towards patients. And those claims are primarily about patients' requests not being met. Now, we have this concept called the cycle of influence, and it versus the cycle of concern. So this was first proposed by the late Dr. Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So by way of analogy, you need to go to the shops, but it's raining and you can't control the rain, but you're concerned about it. So what you can do is you can put on a raincoat, or you can get an umbrella, or you can go later. Those things that you can influence and has an impact on the rain. And, you know, these are the things that you can control, and it's your attitude towards the raining day. So Dr. Covey makes the point that if we want to be proactive in a crisis rather than reactive in a crisis, we will focus on the things that we can control: our response to situations, things we can influence. So, for example, having a policy on managing difficult patients and providing our staff with education can also impact that circle of influence. So think to yourself, like, do you have a policy in your practice for managing difficult patients? We need to let go of those things that we can't influence. Those in our cycle of concern, we care about them and we worry about them, but we can't control them. And this would be the patient's behaviour. We can't really control how the patients are behaving. So if you worry about things outside of your influence, you just end up getting angry and upset and frustrated and worn down. The circles impact each other. So the more you worry about the circle of concern, the less control you have over other things as those circles compress. So recognising the issue is important. Patients can be uncooperative, hostile, demanding, disruptive, and unpleasant, although it's important to remember that patients may actually also think doctors and staff show some of these characteristics. They might have unrealistic expectations or be unwilling to take responsibility for their health. And all these factors can contribute to making the interaction with a patient a challenging experience. So say, you know, you have had a bad day, you're tired, you're hungry, you might have a personal situation going on. You know, it's important to keep you cool and don't try and win an argument. You know, the systems can somehow be going against you as well. So there are things you can't control, such as, you know, how hard it was for the patient to park, or the billing that they're upset about, wait times, things that you actually can't really change in the moment. So recognising the issue, as I said, is really important, what you can control and what you can't control. And establishing expectations is really important. So the patient won't always verbalise what their expectations are, but if you are aware of them and they're unrealistic, it's important to reinforce the facts with the patients. So to set clear expectations with every interaction with them if you can. And you can apologise if you need to. So if you're running late, let them know, so that they're aware that they won't be seen straight away. And I've certainly had some practices, and I think we all know that there are particular clinicians that do run over regularly. As I said, I've had some practices, say, for example, strike up a bit of a deal with the coffee shop next door, and they get vouchers for the patients. And if the delays are really long, they'll, you know, tell the patient, get their mobile number, give them a voucher for a coffee, and ask them to go next door, and they'll you know, send them a text or call their mobile when the doctor's ready. And that can sometimes really diffuse a difficult situation. So it's important to listen, ask questions, and set boundaries. You need to identify the difficult situation as difficult. You know, you can say, name the elephant in the room. Look, you know, I understand that you're upset. Verbalising the difficulty can help to build trust, and it opens the way to considering working together towards a solution. So you support the patient by listening carefully, showing empathy, People are much more likely to listen if they feel they have been listened to. So be curious about what's going on with that patient, and, don't try and win an argument. Arguing, talking over the patient, or even interrupting the patient can lead to a downward spiral in the interaction. Even a difficult patient can actually have a real problem. Kindness can really take the heat out of an argument. So using kindness can certainly diffuse a situation. So let's talk a bit about the types of patients that you might encounter. So there are 4 types of difficult patients that have been described by Deborah Bailu-Volk. So she describes them as dependent clingers, the entitled demander, the manipulative, help-rejecting complainer, and the self-destructive denier. Now, in Avant's experience, there are 3 types which exhibit similar behaviour, and that's the abusive patient, the patient that has unrealistic expectations, and that non-compliant patient. Now, you might find the abusive patient has that sort of verbal and physical abuse. They've got quite confronting behaviour. They can be rude, aggressive, threatening, harassing. They can, write rude and confronting letters, emails, calls to the practice. They can even threaten to self-harm or harm others. Now, it's important you advise the patients that you're aware of the threatening or aggressive treatment of staff and that it is not acceptable. I was in a practice just this week and there were a number of signs up on the wall saying that that practice will not tolerate abusive and disruptive behaviour. So you adopt a firm and authoritative communication style. Always remember your good documentation. So, write down everything that's happened. In the case of a claim or complaint, our solicitors will rely upon that to defend you. End phone calls and consultations if the patient is becoming abusive and confronting. Consider requiring a patient contract. I don't know if any of you have ever employed this, but I certainly know that there are practices that do, particularly in more rural and remote areas where there isn't an alternative practice to send a patient to. They will often put together a patient contract, and that will talk about the style of and expectation of communication that they want from that patient in a formal agreement with the recurrent, for those patients with recurrent severe behavioural problems. And of course, there is always the option, not always, but as a last resort, terminating that doctor-patient relationship. And I think I'll talk a bit more about that further along. So I think it's important to mention that there should always be safety first. So have you ever been in a situation where you felt your safety was at risk or that the safety of others was at risk? Now, I once had a practice that I was assisting, and the practice manager, the patient was at the front desk. It was a regular patient. They were a young patient. They'd known this patient since they were young, that they were a child, and they had an intellectual disability. And so rather than have the situation escalate at the front desk with a lot of eyes watching, they asked the patient to go into a room. And this is something that you can employ, so you can, with safety in mind and the safety of others, you can take a patient into another room. But in this circumstance, unfortunately, they put the patient between their escape and the door. And it wasn't until they got inside that room that they realised the patient was obviously on some sort of substance, and the patient was getting aggressive. So if you are going to move the patient into another room, just keep your safety front of mind. And if there is a door, make sure that you don't put a way to escape through a door, that you don't put the patient between you and that ability to get out of the room if things escalate. Your safety is paramount. And you need to plan for this situation before it occurs. So that would be something you could even practice with staff. If you have, say, for example, a policy around this, even if it's an expected patient behaviour policy, it should be documented in a policy what you expect of patients, and that can often be used as a way to diffuse the situation. So if you've got somebody at the front desk and they're escalating and getting aggressive, being able to even put the policy between you and the patient and draw the attention away from that interaction face to face and to the policy. You can say to the patient, I'm sorry, I'm going to get you to sit down over there and read our expected patient behaviour policy, or our whatever you want to call it, and it will outline what your expectations are from your patients about their behaviour. And that can often diffuse a situation and just calm things down a little bit. And staff should be trained on that policy and understand it and know where it is. And if you have one, I ask you now, like, do you know where it is? Do you know what it contains? And do your staff know what it contains? And you can also, depending on whether this is appropriate for your practice, have safety duress alarms installed, and you can use those if necessary. Now, the patient with unrealistic expectations. So I think we've all encountered those. They're the patients that you would consider quite high maintenance. You know, these patients that come and like to tell the doctor what to do rather than actually go through the process of a diagnosis. They can often be non-compliant as well. And they expect instant and perfect outcomes. And they're that sort of patient that may threaten legal action if their demands are denied. So it's important with those sort of patients to set clear boundaries based on your expertise and skills, explain what you can and cannot do, and be prepared to direct them appropriately. Don't go beyond your comfort zone and do things or not do things because that suits the patient. And I can tell you, we've had plenty of examples, particularly with drug-seeking patients, where a doctor has felt that they have been pushed into, you know, giving a repeat prescription where they wouldn't normally because the patient was being really demanding and that didn't suit them. And they have absolutely come to the attention of the medical board and been criticised heavily for doing so. So it's having those skills to recognise when you are beyond your comfort zone and being dictated to by a difficult and demanding patient and putting a stop to it. And whether that, you know, means that you have to do some training in it, that's fine, as long as you know that you're doing the right thing by you and you're ultimately doing the right thing by the patient. You can adopt a shared decision-making approach with these sorts of patients. And you have good documentation to support your discussions. Avoid approaching difficult patients with inappropriate heroism, and absolutely be prepared to say no if that's what you think is the right thing to do. And do be prepared for the patient to go elsewhere. That also can be a solution for both of you. There's always the non-compliant patient as well, we find, certainly in our claims data at Avant. So they usually don't follow your advice. They continue in behaviours which are detrimental to their health, and apparently cannot or will not comply. So that the patient's, oh, I forgot about that. They certainly can be time consuming. A good relationship between the doctor and the patient, which is grounded in trust, is important. So utilise systems for follow-up and investigations and significant missed appointments. Inform these patients of the reasons and stress the importance of advice given, as well as explaining the consequences of non-compliance. And document that you've had those discussions with the patients. These are the patients that we see at Avant that make complaints because, you know, that was they say that they were never told this, and unless it's written down, as far as the medical board's concerned, it never happened. So as I said, inform them of the reasons, stress the importance of the advice given, as well as explaining the consequences of not complying, and document it. Now, you could always explore the reasons for this non-compliance. You know, are there financial barriers, time barriers? And I did talk about documenting, but also include in the records any phone calls or emails that you might have had with this patient and the advice that you gave them. And, you know, it's important to review these patients and remind them of the advice that you've given them previously. It's almost a goal to train these patients in ownership of the compliance to their healthcare and what you have advised them to do. So after the conversation, important to, as I said, document, but reflect and get support. So it can be helpful to debrief with a trusted friend. Our top tips would be to stay calm and professional, try to see the consultation from the patient's perspective, work together with the patient to find a solution and act in their best interests. And as I said, have a debrief with a colleague after a difficult conversation. And also for you and your staff, consider a training session in mastering challenging interactions. Training staff and training yourself and practicing these scenarios can be really helpful in diffusing situations when patients and staff are getting hot under the collar. So what about patient complaints? Well, we recommend having a staff member responsible for complaints. That can often be the practice manager or somebody senior in the practice who deals specifically with complaints. Always keep a record of complaints, and our solicitors would say, don't put them in the medical notes, keep a separate file specifically for patient complaints. And you might like to, you know, have a note in the patient's medical record that alerts you to the fact that they have made a complaint, but not, you know, what the complaint is in the notes. So you might have a little flag of some sort, or just say, you know, CR, which means complaint register, so that you know that that patient has a complaint in the complaint register. Have a policy or a process in place for patient complaints, and that can often be on your website too. You know, what your complaints process is. You can have it on a chart on the wall. I've seen practices with, you know, complaints boxes at the front desk. Although they're a dying breed now, it's mostly sort of online. I guess what we're trying to avoid is, first and foremost, having the patient feel like they have to complain to the medical board to get heard, you know, and we'll go into online reviews later, but, you know, avoiding that too. I mean, there's nothing more depressing than seeing a patient rant on Google about you and your practice. If the complaint is substantial, ask for it in writing. And when you receive a complaint, we recommend that you respond within 24 hours, even if it's just to say that you're looking into it. And because we have found that it's worth putting in the effort to address a complaint early. And honestly, if you are concerned about any sort of complaint, we do get these calls all the time on our medico-legal advisory service. So if you are an Avant member, we do have a 1-800 number, 1-800-128-268, I think it is. And you can ring that and a lawyer will be on the other end of the phone. And you can discuss with them if you do get a patient complaint and you think it is going to escalate into something that might actually end up with a regulator. Speak to your medical defence organisation, if that's Avant, that's our medico-legal advisory service, and they will give you real-time, honest and good advice about how to manage these. Because, as I said, it's worth putting in the effort to address complaints early and getting some legal advice. Now, patient complaints, what A study by Vincent et al. Published in The Lancet said that the decision to take legal action was determined not only by the original injury, but also by the insensitive handling and poor communication after the original incident. So those complaining followed an adverse outcome where were found to want the following: an apology, an explanation, accountability, prevention, immediate or additional treatment, an admission of error, punishment, and something to change. So you can see there, the patients want to be heard and understood. They want an explanation, an apology, and something to change. And I don't know about you, but like whenever I feel, even, you know, it doesn't have to be medical, but you've had a poor customer service experience, you really just want to have your say, get an explanation of what went wrong, an apology, and know that that's not going to happen to somebody else in the future. And so and I think it was 60% of patients wouldn't complain if they were heard, understood, and apologised to. Going through a complaints process can be absolutely debilitating and stressful as a clinician and as a practice. You really want to put things in place to avoid that happening for you and your practice. So understanding how to manage your patient complaints, nip them in the bud, and make sure they don't go further is really important. So do not ignore the problem, avoid accusing the patient, and certainly don't tell the patient that there's nothing you can do for them. So ignoring the problem or exporting it to another person in the practice doesn't make the difficulty disappear. Accusing the patient of being problematic may provoke patient anger and counter-blaming. Telling the patient that there's nothing wrong or that there is nothing you can do for him or her may trigger persistent attempts to prove that a problem exists. And attempting to solve problems with psychopharmacology, unless carefully introduced and based on a correct diagnosis, also may prove to be very problematic. So in terms of resolving the complaint, you gather the facts, review medical notes, get copies of reports, records of phone calls, discussions with relevant staff, check your local protocols and check what happened on that day, and make sure you fully understand what the complaint is about, who is it about, what the patient wants in making the complaint, and if a referral or follow-up is required, work out a management plan for the patient. Now, these things can go a long way in resolving a complaint before it ends up at, OHO or the medical board or some sort of regulator. So as much as you can manage them in-house is ideal. And certainly Avant's website has a lot of information on open disclosure, because there, obviously sometimes mistakes are made, and it is important to explain to the patient properly what happened and apologise. And you can certainly do training on the Avant website in that, and there are certainly fact sheets to help you with that as well. Now, we can't talk about this area without touching on ending the doctor-patient relationship. And it still does surprise me after all these years that there are some doctors who don't think that this is actually an option, and it absolutely is an option, ending the doctor-patient relationship. So when is it okay? Well, when the relationship is no longer therapeutic or in the best interests of the patient. Openness, trust, and good communication are vital for a doctor's and a patient's working partnership. Now, if that is broken and irrevocably, then obviously the best thing to do for the patient is to find them someone new, because trust is particularly important for a doctor-patient relationship to be positive. It is acceptable and reasonable to determine that a clinical relationship is no longer therapeutic. Now, this could be because the doctor feels they can no longer provide objective and dispassionate care to the patient because they have particularly negative feelings towards a patient, or they are at the other end of the spectrum. Safety of you and practice staff also is an important consideration. It is very important to avoid allegations of discrimination. So take care that ending the clinical relationship cannot be interpreted as based on reasons such as gender, sexual preference, marital status, disability, age, or HIV status. Decisions are usually not taken lightly to do this, but again, get some advice from us at Avant. I certainly have an advice I often send out to doctors with a sample letter of how to terminate the doctor-patient relationship. But ring your medical defence organisation, get some advice on how to do it so that you stay out of a complaints process with the patient. Because as I said, that relationship is two-way. It's got to work for the doctor, it's got to work for the patient. And once that's broken down, then sometimes you just have to move them on. Now, I have had practices where they've gotten to a stage, say it's a 10-doctor practice, it's a general practice. And Mrs. Jones has been a patient there for 40 years and has slowly made their way through every doctor in the practice. And, you know, each doctor after a period of time has come out and slammed the files down on the front at the front desk and said, I just cannot see that patient anymore, move them on to someone else. And they eventually exhaust everybody in the practice. If there are doctors on this presentation, it's really important to support the staff in managing those patients. You don't want to get to a situation where there's literally nobody else in the practice that you can pass that patient on to. And if that's the case, perhaps, you know, send the patient on to another practice that's nearby. And you might have a reciprocal arrangement with another practice if you are in a specialty, say psychiatry, where sometimes it's important that you terminate that doctor-patient relationship, that you have somebody you know will take those patients on when you can no longer do that. In terms of the medical board, it's all about, for them, the continuity of care of that patient. So yes, you can terminate the relationship, but you should give them, the patients, an option of where else that they can go, and then send those records on. So be aware that ending a clinical relationship can take some time. So, you know, you need to plan ahead, consider how you're going to inform the patient, talk with senior colleagues and peers. As I said, consider advising your medical defence organisation, particularly when there's a serious breakdown in case of future complaints, and follow a clear process. So be aware that ending a clinical relationship takes time. In the instance of the more challenging circumstances, you may decide to talk with the patient and give them the opportunity to change their behaviour. It may be helpful too to consider in advance how you might respond to what the patient says or their actions. So if you work within a practice of doctors, talking to your colleagues is important. Will the decision be that the patient can no longer see you as a doctor, or can no longer come and see any of the doctors in this practice? It might be dependent on the issues at play though. So if you're having a rotating call system, or it's likely you need to provide care for that patient after hours if you're on a roster at that time. So ending the relationship, you discuss it with the patient, you clarify the expectations, you prepare to justify your decision, prepare a letter, facilitate alternative care, and provide records to the new doctor. Now, if you are transferring a patient to another practitioner outside of your practice, by all means, I just today gave some advice to a practice about how to do that, and whether that's you know, a health summary going or the entire notes going. You know, it's important to understand that, you know, you might have ordered tests for that patient, for example, what requires follow-up, how you're going to do that, getting consent from the patient to transfer their records. And of course, you know, you can charge a fee for that as well, but that's something that you should have in your policy and procedures. So, yes, as I said, get in touch with us if you want some advice and some templates for how to do this. But again, absolutely, when your communication is at that point where you need to terminate a doctor-patient relationship, a patient-practice relationship, it can be done. Now, I said I was going to talk a little bit about online reviews because I know that this is a real problem for some practices. So unfortunately, if you do have a disgruntled patient, a difficult patient, if they don't feel heard, they will often jump online and take their views and opinions to the internet for the world to see. And that can be really distressing for staff. And I've certainly had situations where they have patients have jumped online to say Google reviews or Yelp or Real Self or any number of other online platforms and put the names of staff at the front desk and called them all sorts of awful things. And that can be really distressing for your staff. And it can be a real challenge as a practice manager to manage that. Look, I say to doctors and practices, it can be really, it can be helpful sometimes to read what patients are saying about you. And you may actually be able to learn a thing or two that maybe you didn't understand about your practice, but equally there are people who do put vexatious things online, who make things up. I had one just the other day and they looked into this person's name and it wasn't even a person at the practice, and they actually think that they'd maybe their complaint was legitimate, but they'd put it on the wrong practice with a similar name. It can be really distressing. 45% of social media users have provided online ratings, according to recent polls. Now, this is over twice as many just a couple of years before. Men and women are similar in this behaviour across age groups, and the incidents range from as much as 40% to 65 plus segment is 50%, and over 50% in the 30 to 39 age group are putting reviews online. And you can see there at this point, health and medical services were 13%. I would say that's safely increased over time. So you've got places like Rate MDs. So this is a free website that allows users to submit and read reviews for doctors, dentists, psychologists, urgent care centres, group practices and hospitals. So the site is free to use for both consumers and doctors. It was originally launched in 2004 and has undergone a number of changes in recent years with huge updates. Now, they actually generate revenue through two means. So they sell advertising, of course, to physicians, healthcare facilities and insurance companies, and you can actually pay for a plan. So, for example, a doctor may pay a fee in US dollars per month for what they call a promoted plan. And this plan includes a variety of features that include ratings managers, which affords the doctors opportunities to hide multiple negative reviews. Now, the site's rating manager is one of the features available only to doctors who pay a monthly fee. It's hosted in the States. I do see Australian doctors that take advantage of that, because if you've got a paid plan, you're allowed to hide up to 3 Rate MD's reviews. You can also deem reviews as suspicious, and you can select a feature to show particular ratings at the top. It's very different in America, though. There's not the same advertising guidelines like we have here. And it also allows users to rate the doctors anonymously, and this can result in ratings which appear to everybody to be unfair and inaccurate. Now, you can request the ratings be removed. You can respond online. Unfortunately, we certainly would never recommend responding online to a patient. In fact, I gave a talk with Anne Tonkin, the chair of the medical board, just recently about the revised guidelines for advertising for cosmetics, and she spoke of a case where they had a doctor that they had to reprimand heavily for engaging in an argument online with a patient through Google reviews. So our advice is always do not engage with patients' reviews online. I know they can be upsetting, but avoid it. I know that there are ways you can pay a reputation management company to improve your profile. But honestly, in Australia, it's just not what you do. I know that they do that in America where it's hosted. And as I said, really avoid responding to patients. Now, Google reviews differs. So sometimes I've had practices say to me, I didn't even create this Google review section. I don't know how it came about. And my understanding is that, look, when you have a business and if enough people sort of check into it and review you, it suddenly creates this business you can see on that slide. And so people checking in automatically generates a profile on Google for the doctor, which then subsequently allows patients to start reviewing the doctor or the practice. Now, in order to flag a review for removal, you need to claim and verify the business through Google. And you can do that with attendees too. So to add your Google business information to Google Maps and search and other Google properties, you can get access to it through claiming. And you can see there, I think on the slide, that that profile has been claimed. And really all it does for you is give you the ability to flag reviews for removal. And I had a practice this week that actually did that. And they were able to show that it wasn't a patient of the practice, and Google did actually take it down within 24 hours. It does need two-factor authentication to claim it, and they are in the States. So my understanding is they send you a card. Look, I would, if your Google reviews are creating a problem for you, by all means, claim your profile and get a bit of control over it. But as I said, I can't state strongly enough, do not engage with patient reviews online. At the very minimum, you certainly can, and I say this to practices, you can respond, but just say, we're sorry that has been your experience. We'd love to talk to you about it. Please call the practice on and give the number, but that's it. And then, hopefully you can speak to that patient and find out what the problem is, and it might be something that you can fix. But certainly don't be getting into arguments and commenting on reviews, because you can request the forum host to remove offending comments. You can ask the author to withdraw the comments. So that's, if they do ring you and you come to some sort of agreement and about that, but you can actually ask them to remove it. We have seen defamation proceedings instituted and successfully lately. I think there was one very recently in the media where a doctor was successfully claimed damages from a patient defaming them online. Certainly don't respond personally. The practice can respond, but just with, leaving your number and offering to have a chat to them. And you can also just ignore the comments and wait for them to move down the forum page. But reviews about you and your practice posted on forums and the internet are becoming an increasingly common way for patients to express dissatisfaction with their health treatment. Whereas once patients would write letters of complaint to health complaints entities, or even just to you, they often go straight to social media now, and it really does deprive you of the opportunity to address their concerns or correct misunderstandings about their treatment. Reading adverse comments on the internet forums can be a cause of considerable distress, as I said, but it's important to step back and resist the temptation to immediately reply angrily or defensively. And as I said, an angry response can trigger further negative comments and online feedback and lead to a formal patient complaint. And as I said with Ann Tonkin, it has happened. They have reprimanded a doctor for engaging in an online slinging match with a patient. So finally, I think it's important that you encourage your patients to give feedback. It's certainly a way to address quality improvement at your practice. And it can be an item that you can have on your agenda for your weekly meeting or monthly meeting. You know, what has the feedback been from patients? It's a way to see patterns emerging with your patients too, of, you know, if 1 or 2 or 3 patients complain about something particular, you can use that as a tool for quality improvement. Because, you know, every complaint or bit of feedback is a learning opportunity. You can respond and change unacceptable behaviour and systems. You educate and prepare your staff for managing difficult patients. It's important to look out for each other. And I think finally too, and I've certainly hear on the medico-legal advisory, our lawyers saying, you know, sometimes patients do just want their money back, and sometimes just doing that or considering not charging the patient can nip it in the bud and prevent the complaint from going further. So now I'd like to invite you, if you've got any questions. Thank you for participating in your time, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And if I can't, I will certainly get back to you, because obviously I'm not a lawyer and sometimes the questions are quite legal. So I can certainly get back to you if it's a more legalistic question as well.
Yes, we do have question, Annabel. So I will start from the last question. Please explain, what do you mean by implementation of medicopharmacology while dealing with a problem patient?
Oh, so sometimes doctors, sometimes you think that the patient actually has maybe even a mental health condition that's making them behave in a certain way, but you have to tread really warily if that's the case. And I certainly did have a practice where a patient had been a patient of the practice for 50 years, and their dementia was making the patient was getting quite difficult to manage because of their dementia, and they turned from quite a lovely, compliant, genial patient to an extremely aggressive, angry and difficult patient. And eventually that patient did actually terminate the doctor-patient relationship even after all that time, because they found the patient so hard to manage. So in those sorts of instances where you're thinking there might be a pathophysiology behind this behaviour and instituting a pharmacological regime to manage it, just tread really warily in that space. It might just be that they are a difficult patient. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Can we end a patient-doctor relationship and suggest to see another doctor if the patient has not come back to discuss results despite multiple recalls?
So in terms of if the result is clinically significant, then it is very important to get the patient back. However, you can't force a patient back for results. So in those instances, we say you need to contact the patient 3 times. The third is a registered letter. The first 2 times, we would suggest maybe 2 different modes of contact. So you might phone them in the morning one day, and then maybe SMS if they've consented to SMS in an afternoon, or ring in an afternoon the next day, or that second time. And then the third time needs to be a registered letter. Now you document all attempts to contact the patient, but you only are required to try 3 times, the third being a registered letter. Now, if it is a clinically significant test result, I would pop something in that letter with some information to augment how important it is. So say they have a skin biopsy that's come back suggestive of melanoma, then you pop an information sheet in there about melanoma. Now, if it is something very significant, I have certainly had practices get the police to do welfare checks to get a patient to, if they're that concerned. Does
And
that
I
answer?
think always in this case, it's good to give your indemnity a call because
Yep.
they can advise on case-to-case basis as well.
They can.
But basically, the question is if the relation can be ended based on it. So let's say that the practice tried to contact the patient multiple times. The patient never respond. They send the email with the results. The patient never respond. And half a year later, patient trying to engage with the practice again. Could they relationship then?
You can terminate the doctor-patient relationship at any time. I guess the question is, why are you terminating the doctor-patient relationship? And that might come into question. So in that case, I would ring and speak to a lawyer and make sure that that's okay. Because if the patient makes a complaint to the medical board, you would have to have good reason why you have terminated that relationship.
Thank you.
I don't know that they would, you'd have to talk to a lawyer, but I'm not sure that the fact that they wouldn't come back to get test results would be
good enough.
Yeah, would be sufficient to terminate a doctor-patient relationship.
Yes. How would you take the statement or complaint from the mentally sick person?
I'm sorry.
How would you take the statement or complaint of mentally sick person? So it's basically how to deal with the people who are mentally sick and they complain to the receptionist, and how to protect the health professionals. With protecting health professionals, we always say document.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's all about certainly if that patient is really hard to manage, that's why you've got somebody in the practice to call on, like the person who is pretty much in charge of patient complaints and managing difficult patients. As I said, whether that's the practice manager or someone quite senior. I know that mental health patients can sometimes be quite tricky, and so you should practice with the staff and have a process of how to deal with those patients when they are being like that at the front desk or in general, but having someone more senior who's well trained on negotiating and managing those patients.
And I think it's what you said to us earlier, the safety first. So
yeah, absolutely, safety first. And you know, there is certainly you do not want to get yourself in a situation that you can't get out of with a patient like that. And you have to put the staff and your safety first.
Sure. If HCCC requests a local resolution which failed to resolve the complaint, what will be the next step? What we can expect to happen?
If the there's no local complaints resolution?
Yes. So if HCCC requests a local resolution, but it failed to resolve, what can we expect next?
I will get back to you on that, because of course I'm in Queensland and we don't have the HCCC. So I will ask someone, I'll ask one of the lawyers in Sydney what happens after if local resolution doesn't help. I will get back to you.
Sure. It's we will also in future run event probably in November from HCCC. So this question we can also ask them directly.
Oh, good.
And we have another question. That's what to do when one has suspicion that a patient is suicidal. I think the doctor, for the receptionist, the answer is very clear. Just get the doctor. Doctors know what to do. There is a mental health training. We run mental health training here as well very often. So doctors know what to do in these cases and who to call.
Do. And that patient will likely be referred to a psychiatrist or, you know, sent to an emergency department for psychological assessment.
Special numbers we can follow directly on that. I will keep this question then. Okay, that's all of the questions, unless something pop up still. No, I think that's it.
Great.
So,
Well, thank you all so
Majeda?
much.
Yep, thank you.
We would like to take the time to thank everyone for attending the Dealing with Difficult Patients webinar tonight. We hope that the presentation tonight will assist you in your practices. We would like to thank Annabel for taking the time to present tonight. Thank you, Annabel.
Thank you.
You did awesome, actually. Thank you so much. The link for the evaluation survey will pop up on your screens shortly. If you have any further questions, please email practicesupport@cesphn.com.au. Just a quick reminder, we do have a few upcoming events. I did mention the cancer one. We've also got on the 14th of September, the HR strategies, creating accountability for staff and building strong foundations. Thank you everyone for attending today and have a great night.
Thank you.